Welcome to this week's episode of Patch and Rant. I'm Rudy and I will be again your host for this week's episode. Looking back at last week's episode, we talked about Fiddler, how I use Fiddler and how I configure Fiddler to capture all the communication that's happening between the device and the service. It's a perfect tool when you need to capture HTTP and HTTPS traffic that's happening from the device and the service. But again, as I was also mentioning in that episode, it's just one tool. It's always a combination of using multiple tools to figure out what's happening. So in this week's episode, I'm going to talk a little bit about the SyncML tool and how I use the SyncML tool from Oliver Kieselbach to troubleshoot Intune related issues to policies. So when some policies we configured in Intune are not coming down to the device or with a not correct configuration or totally wrong configuration, I start with using the SyncML tool because that tool is going to show me which policies are coming down to my device and which are not. But before we do, we need to take a close look at something else. Because 2 weeks ago, I noticed that somehow PowerShell scripts, platform scripts, were not getting deployed to my device anymore. I was contacted by a lot of people in the community and they were all experiencing the same issue. Somehow, nothing changed with the PowerShell scripts in Intune. Somehow, the new enrolled devices were not receiving them. Well, it seems that Microsoft changed something. Well, I think I need to explain it a little bit more because normally when a device reaches out to the service to fetch the platform scripts using the Intune Management extension will talk with the service which platform scripts are applicable or targeted to that device. From there on, the Intune server side will figure out which platform scripts are applicable to that device, and it will send out that PowerShell script in a big policy request or policy payload, and that's in fact one JSON file. Still nothing weird, right? But somehow Microsoft added something additional to that same JSON file. They added the same PowerShell script to it, but this time also encoded. So we now have a JSON file with the regular PowerShell scripts in it, but also the encoded PowerShell scripts. The same stuff, but encoded. Guess what happens with that JSON file? It will increase 2 times, right? It's the same payload, but this time encoded. Guess what happens if there is a threshold of 2 megabytes server side of Intune? The policy payload, I get a PowerShell script, the JSON file will not be sent over to the device. Well, it will be sent over to the device, but it will be failed to decrypt, to deserialize the JSON file. And with it, all the PowerShell scripts that we configured in Intune will not getting deployed to that device. If you want to read all the details, I just published a blog about it, and I think it will be fun to read it, so please go ahead. But I guess it's time to move on to this week's topic. So, in the next couple of minutes, the next 10 minutes, we're going to talk a little bit about SyncML because I need to explain what SyncML is and why we need to use it when we have issues related to policies not coming down to our device. I will show you a demo how I use the tool from Oliver Kieselbach to troubleshoot those policies. And yeah, I guess we need to move on to the first question then. What is SyncML? Well, if I need to explain what SyncML is, I always explain it that it's a language the device and the service use to talk with each other. The same, I'm talking English right now, I can also talk Dutch, but to make sure that people understand me. The same, the device and Intune service need to do. They need to use a language to talk with each other. That language is SyncML, OMDM. It uses OMDM SyncML protocol to do so. So I guess I need to explain it a little bit more. So we have a device. The device is getting enrolled. The device is reaching out to the service, asking which policies are targeted for that device. So from there on, the server side will perform a get command in SyncML to ask the device which policies are configured on the device. First to get, the device will respond which policies are being set to the device, and it does that for every single policy. And from there on, the server side will perform a set command or a replay and an add to ensure the policy is going to be set on the device. From there on, the server side will perform another get to ensure the policy is being set on the device. So it does that for every single policy right now, which can be quite impactful, and also the reason why sometimes sync is pretty slow, because it needs to perform a set get for every single policy. But all those policies are well set, are wrapped in a SyncML language. So how are we going to take a closer look at that SyncML language? Well, I use a tool called the SyncML Tool, which is pretty useful to take a close look at the policies that are coming down. But before we take a close look at the SyncML Tool, I want to also explain that you can also use the Microsoft Message Analyzer tool to do so. But that Microsoft Message Analyzer tool is end of life, and it's way more difficult, or it takes more time to set it up. It needs to install some prerequisites before it can install the tool itself, and it's not that clear of an overview. And the SyncML tool from Oliver Giesbach, well, I think it's a perfect tool to do so. So the SyncML tool from Oliver Giesbach, I use that tool to check what the server is going to send over to my device. I use the tool to troubleshoot Intune related issues to policies, because if I open the tool and I was pretty sure I configured a policy and somehow the policy is not being set, the SyncML tool is going to show me what's happening. So if I configured a policy to create a local administrator on the device, which is pretty stupid to do so, it will show me in plain text the CSP that is being sent over to the device, and also the password in plain text. So the SyncML tool will show you all the information you need when there is an issue with the policy not coming down. So I will show you what's happening on the hood. And I guess it's time to move on to the demo, shall we? Demo time it is. Well, I already explained what the SyncML tool is and how that tool can be so useful when we need to troubleshoot an issue with a policy that's not coming down to the device, or at least when we expect that there is an issue with a policy. So if you want to do some troubleshooting, we need the tool, right? So head over to the GitHub page from Oliver Giesbach and download the zip file from over there. Once you extracted the content, it contains not big, just one executable. We can just execute, and from there on, we can spot a lot of information going on. As you can see, I already synced with Intune to ensure that I have all the information here on my screen that I want to show you, because if I press the MDM sync button too many times, I will be blocked by the service, because Microsoft doesn't like you checking in your device 20 times in 1 second. But before zooming into the policies on how SyncML is going to show you that, I need to do some explanation about those two magical buttons at the bottom, because one of them is the MDM sync button, and we all know what that button is. At least I hope that we do, because that button is going to sync our device with the Intune service. So if you configure the policy for config refresh or a policy to create a local administrator on the device, those policies will come down once we press that button. But I guess we all know that button or that sync can take some time. It can be slow, right? So if we, for example, open the company portal, press the sync button over there, it does the same thing. It starts syncing with Intune, and we all know that it's taking its time. We are looking at it and are wondering what it is doing in the background. Well, the SyncML tool is going to show you what it's doing in the background. It's syncing the policies. But those are the Intune policies, right? So that's why the button on the right is the MMPC sync button. So this button is going to sync with the Microsoft Managed Platform Cloud. And now I'm hearing you think, what's that? Well, that's a new piece of Microsoft infrastructure they put in place to ensure that all the latest features and the policies we can configure for it. So, for example, policies for the endpoint privilege management or policies for device inventory will come down to the device when we press that MMPC button. And the wonderful thing, and why I like that MMPC infrastructure, because it's way faster than Intune. And I will show you in a couple of minutes why it's faster, so you can see it with your own eyes. So, for example, I configured a config refresh policy in my tenant to enable that config refresh policy is going to be enabled on my device with a cadence of 45 minutes. I'm enabling config refresh on my device to ensure that my all the policies are not going to be at drift on my device when my device is offline. So I configure the policy to 45 minutes, and if I'm going to open the SyncMLViewer and I'm going to find out if the policy is indeed configured on my device, I will see that first Microsoft or Intune is going to add the policy with the cadence of 45 minutes. And from there on, we will notice that it's going to perform a get on the same policy because Microsoft, the Intune service, wants to know if the policy indeed has been set. And from there on, we see that it's also sending back its results. And it does that for every single policy. So I guess that's why the whole screen is filled with policies, and it takes its time when you press the sync button, because it needs to sync every single policy. For every single policy, get, set, get, and that takes its time. But besides the config refresh policy, I want to also show you something else. So, for example, if you configured an additional local administrator on a device, which is pretty bad to do this with this CSP, and I'll show you why. Nowadays, you can do the same thing with labs, which is way better. But, for example, back in the days, if you configured this local user CSP to create an additional local administrator with a simple password, pass my PC. Let's see what happens while running the SyncML tool. So if you create it, and if you are wondering if the user is indeed created on the device, we can just take a close look at it, and we will notice that every single time the device syncs with Intune, the CSP is going to perform an add. And you will spot it in plain text. So every time the device syncs, the plain text password will show up in the SyncML tool because it's sent over in plain text. And the result and the reason why that CSP is always erroring out, because that policy isn't able to perform a get. So that's why that policy is always erroring out, and that's something you can spot with the SyncML tool as well, because I was showing you how the config refresh is performing at and a get, which is successful because the results are being sent over to the service. That ain't happening for the local user CSP. And that's why the SyncML tool can be pretty useful. So if you do the same thing with MMPC, before I'm going to clear the stream to show you why it's faster. So I'm going to clear the stream, and I'm going to press the MMPC sync button. Normally, it's going to take a couple of seconds, right? If the device is going to sync with Intune well. With MMPC, it's not. It is done within a second. Why? Because as if I was just explaining, with Intune, it will perform a get, set, get for every single policy, right? With MMPC, those configuration, those policies will be sent over as a declarative document to the device. It's one big document that contains all the settings we need for device inventory or EPM, right? So within 1 second, those policies will be sent over to the device. But that's only for 2 policies, right? Well, let me tell you something funny, because all the Intune policies will be moved over in the future from Intune to MMPC. So it will start with the resource access policies, just how we moved the workload sliders back in the days to move the workload resource access to Intune. The same thing is now going to happen from Intune to MMPC, which is a great thing because it's way faster, and with declarative device management, the device doesn't need to check into the service anymore if the policy changed on the device itself. The device can actually change the policy back to the desired set on the device without needing to contact the service, which is pretty amazing. And again, we all love fast policy delivery, right? So SyncML Tool is pretty useful for troubleshooting those policies. But that's not the only thing the SyncML Tool can do, because as I was just explaining, we configured a CSP to create a local user or create or enable config refresh. Well, the SyncML Tool also allows us to do that on the device itself. We can also add a CSP on the device itself. So we don't need Intune to push a policy to the device. We can also use the SyncML Tool to get, add, or replace a CSP on the device itself. So it's pretty useful for troubleshooting as well. This part of this tool is created based on the local MDM client from Neows. And it allows us to do almost the same kind of things we can do with Intune. So, for example, I can perform a get on the device hardware CSP, and within a couple of seconds, it will show you the information. But we can do that for every single CSP. Also, CSPs that are not documented in the Microsoft documentation. We can add them, we can replace them. So I use this tool myself, of this part of the tool, when I need to create a policy on the device itself and I don't want to rely on Intune to set that policy for me. I can use this tool to add a policy, and I can add all my troubleshooting tools to it. So I can put Fiddler in place, I can open Pokemon, I can open all the tools I use and put them in place before I'm going to add that policy. So I love this tool. It has some amazing things as well. And I guess with this brief overview of the SyncML tool, I guess it's time to finish off the session. So what's next? Well, in this week's episode of Patch and Rant, we talked about SyncML, what SyncML is, and how we can use the SyncML tool from Oliver Kieselbach to troubleshoot issues when a certain policy is not coming down to our device. That tool will show you all the information you need to do some troubleshooting. But I guess looking back at the Fiddler session we did, that was just a brief introduction of Fiddler. How to set it up, how to configure it. I guess next time we will do a deep dive into Fiddler. I will show you a trace I took when my device was getting enrolled into Intune, and how I use that trace and that kind of information to troubleshoot other issues when a device is not getting enrolled into Intune. But I guess before we wrap up, I talk a lot about troubleshooting tools, and I guess in the next episode I will show you a couple more. But if you are looking for a reporting solution, well, that's where Patch My PC comes into play. You need to keep an eye out for an upcoming Advanced Insight for Intune solution. That tool will show you all the reporting information you need that Microsoft is not going to give you. Well, we do. So come to our website and take a closer look at our solutions.